I am by no means an artist. Rather, I paint pictures with words. I don't have beautiful animation and custom music to offer you, but what I do have is a story. So, how shall I begin? It is a truth to be universally. No. I can't steal from Jane Austen. That would be sacrilege. It was a dark and stormy. Okay, no, way too cliche. And also, it wasn't dark and stormy. It was a cold night, sure, and it was snowing, but only the gentlest of snows. Now I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let's start again. Do you ever wonder where dragons come from? Would it be strange to know that I'm not really completely sure either, even though I am one? I can start from what I know. I am Aspen Dracaena, and this is my story. There was a monastery of sorts. It wasn't like the more familiar monasteries of well known religions around the world. It was run by an obscure faith that has now been lost to time. It was a faith devoted to study and living in harmony with the natural world around it. It was a place of joy and welcome. It was a place of contemplation and peace, except for us, the strange children that showed up on the doorstep every few years. Sometimes we were a chaotic lot, but the monks always took us in. They educated us and raised us with love until we reached adulthood. But how strange were we? Well, it was obvious we weren't quite human. One cold winter night, one of those children was mysteriously dropped on the doorstep. The tiny baby wasn't even swaddled in blankets, but placed directly on the icy steps. After a quick rap tap tap on the door, she was simply left behind. You'd think she'd be crying or painfully cold, but she wasn't. She gurgled happily as she reached up and caught snowflakes that didn't melt in her hands. Next to her was a leather bag with crystals and gems overflowing from the top. She didn't have to wait for long. The monks had learned to expect the unexpected, and they saw all the children as gifts to be cherished, so they often took turns keeping watch at night. Percival was the monk on duty that night. He had been reading by candlelight, but quickly put his book down the moment he heard the knock at the door. The monks were used to finding the children in various states of dress, so they always kept a basket with blankets on hand ready should another child show up. He grabbed the basket and opened the door to find the smiling baby. She reached for him immediately. "Little one," he said, "how are you not cold?" She merely smiled back, then gurgled and stuck out her dark blue tongue. "Ah, yes, you're definitely one of those children," Percival said with a chuckle. "Whoever thought I'd be fortunate enough to be the only one on duty when one of you showed up?" It was indeed considered good fortune to be the one on duty to find one of these odd children. The children often bonded with whoever found them first. But by seemingly strange coincidence, the child's talents often tended to line up with the monk's interests. Whether those who left the children at the monastery waited until the right monk was on watch, or things just worked out that way, nobody knew. All Percival knew was that this child would be his student, and he was looking forward to teaching her how to read and write. In case you didn't know by now, that happily chilly little baby was me. I was raised by all the monks, of course, and spent much of my time playing games with the other children. Beatrix, who hovered slightly over the ground when she walked and had hair like fluffy clouds. Randall, whose flame red hair seemed to actually be on fire from time to time. Isolde, who swam like a fish in the nearby river, likely in part due to the gills on the sides of her neck. And Benedict, who had a talent for finding precious stones and gems in caves near the river. But my favorite thing was to sit at night with whichever monk was on duty and read myself to sleep. My childhood was relatively peaceful, considering everything. Idyllic, even. There were always friends to play with, and because of my natural curiosity, I was a good student. Also, due to my ability to handle extreme winter temperatures, I often, and happily, was sent out in the winter to forage for food, to fluff out our winter stores, or hunt for wild game so we had something fresh to eat. The years went on, and I became Percival's scribe when his arthritis became painful. I also took on curation duties for the library. Beatrix had left at one point. According to the monks, this was normal, and nobody was concerned, but I found the whole thing a little worrisome. She wasn't necessarily the type to up and leave, but after asking a few too many questions, all I was told was that someday I'd have the choice to leave as she did. The other children who had been there longer than I had told me that this had happened before, and it was normal. One particularly harsh winter, I was sent off with my crossbow to hunt. It was Isolde's founding day, much like a birthday, except we didn't really know when our birthdays were, and a feast was planned. Getting sent out wasn't an unusual thing for me, so I went out in the cold and searched for some rabbits or possibly a deer. It was a meditative process for me, as I happily walked through the fluffy snow with a skill that even the most cautious deer would envy. Of course, because it was one of my favorite tasks, partially because it provided a little solitude from the busy energy of the monastery, I spent more time than I intended tracking down my prey. Once I finally caught the deer I was looking for, I began to pull things together to return home. Something was wrong, however. As I began my trek back home, the wind had shifted, and I smelled smoke on the air. It wasn't the kind of smoke you'd get from a cozy fire, either. It was the smell of things burning that shouldn't be burning. My palms began to sweat, and my blood began to burn in fear. I knew where that smoke was coming from. The smoke was coming from the monastery. I dropped everything except for my crossbow and arrows, which were already on my harness, and ran as fast as I could, making much faster time than most normal people would due to my strange affinity for the snow. It was too late. There was nothing left but ruins. It was clearly a planned attack, too. All I could do was look away from the grisly devastation before me. Nobody survived. I sank to my knees and sobbed. I cried so long, my tears falling down my cheeks, then turning into ice before they fell into my lap and on the ground in front of me. I would likely have sat there for hours if it wasn't for a strange shift in the air and the sound of large wings flapping. I turned to look as a purple reptilian foot landed only a few yards away from me. If I hadn't been so horrified at what happened, I would have been shocked or terrified or some other emotion, but all I could feel was completely drained. Oh, child, I am so sorry. A deep voice came from over my head. I looked up to see the sleek face of a purple dragon hanging over me. Overhead, behind her, I could see other dragons carrying buckets of water or spouting water out of their own mouths to put out the remains of the fire. What? I asked shakily. My dear, you have so much to learn. She got down on the ground and curled up like a cat next to me, possibly to seem less terrifying. We've been sending our young to this monastery since the ancient days. We do so because as dragons, we live in a world dominated by humans, so we want our young to understand them. I took in the information, my brain slightly numb. Does that mean? I asked as I lifted one of my arms to examine my skin for scales. The purple dragon chuckled, then nodded. You've always been a dragon. Every time one of you is ready, one of us comes to bring you back to our kind. But I don't look like a dragon, I said, still sniffling because my nose felt stuffy after all the tears. I then mentally cringed because it had always been obvious I wasn't same as the monks, with my skin so pale it was almost blue, and my imperviousness to cold. You simply need to learn how to shift back to dragon form. Here. The purple dragon breathed over me. I would have expected fire, but instead I felt a pleasant tingle on my skin. That should do it. In order to prevent our children from changing back to dragon form so early, I use a little magic to lock them in human form. You should be able to change easily now. I looked at her, dumbfounded. How? She put her claw gently on my shoulder. Just relax, and you'll feel it. Easier said than done. But I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to let go. I felt a strange but not unpleasant fuzzy feeling in my core. Then it began to spread outward toward my limbs, somehow both hot and cold at the same time. Disoriented, I felt like I'd begun to float, yet my feet were firmly planted on the ground. I instinctually put my arms out so I could fall to my hands and knees. An itch started around my shoulder blades, and then a sensation of being stretched in several directions at once, until suddenly everything stopped. I opened my eyes. My head was much higher off the ground than before. I lifted my right hand so I could inspect it. Instead of soft, pale, human-like skin and delicate fingernails, I saw a reptilian talon covered with sleek, pale, blue-gray scales and sharp claws. Not so bad, was it? The purple dragon asked. No, I said. The whirlwind of emotions I was processing left me less than eloquent. What do I do now? You do as all dragons do, of course, she replied, chuckling again. I find a cave and hoard gold? The purple dragon let out a rich, full laugh, then wiped a tear from her eye. Is that what you think we do, child? I nodded sheepishly, afraid of putting my foot in my mouth again. Or maybe now it was put my claw in my mouth? I wasn't sure. The purple dragon gave me a kind smile, or at least as kind as one could imagine a dragon's smile could be. We do not hoard, my dear. A dragon's job is to collect. We choose something we'd like to archive and keep it preserved for future generations. Certainly some dragons become greedy and choose to hoard riches. But most of us are archivists. What would you like to collect, child? Still feeling awkward about my dragon form, I lifted my head and looked at the monastery. It was painful to see the destruction of all I knew and loved. I stepped forward gingerly, testing my legs out, and slightly flapped my new wings to see how they felt. Then I moved with more purpose toward the location of my favorite room in the monastery. The books were likely burned beyond repair, but I was determined to see if at least one or two had survived. In frustration, my sadness and confusion redirected into anger, and I pulled all the loose stones I could find off the side of the building with my newfound dragon strength. I cleared away as much as I could so I could get my head and one arm into my cherished library. I searched frantically, then managed to find a single book that was only slightly scorched but salvageable. I picked it up gingerly, fearing my strength would destroy what was left. The book was so tiny in my palm, but I carried it like the most precious of treasures back to the purple dragon. Ah, a book. Is this what you want to preserve? She asked. I nodded. Tears began to form in my eyes once more, then dropped to the ground as they turned to crystallized icicles. Yes. I want to collect books. I want to collect them to honor my memory of the monks here, especially Percival. Would that be okay? The purple dragon, in a swirl of magic, changed into the physical form of a human woman and held out her hands to take the book from me. I placed it gently in her hands, then followed suit. Instead of the fuzzy feeling coming from my core, it started from the tips of my fingers and toes, then moved inward. I felt myself shrinking back down to my familiar human form, though my wings didn't fully retract into my back. My head also felt slightly heavier, likely due to my horns not fully retracting either. Child, the purple dragon woman said once I'd stopped changing, I think that would be a beautiful way to honor them. Come, let us find you a suitable cave, and I'll start you on your journey. So that's it. That's how my story began.